Hello, today we're going to talk about resumes, cover letters, and my name is Emily McIsaac. I'm the Student Engagement and Instructional Librarian at Holland College, and you can find me at the library usually on Monday and Tuesday, Wednesday from 8:30 to 4:30, and you can contact me anytime, especially during this pandemic that we're going through if you need extra help with anything related to your courses. The objective of this session is to know where to find jobs, provide practical skills regarding properly writing resumes and cover letters, how to format your resume and cover letter, using portfolios, and interview prep and techniques. So where do you find jobs? There are a lot of databases that are available to you. There are a ton of job databases, and I've listed a couple here: Indeed, LinkedIn, Career Development Services Job Bank, and the Government of Canada Job Bank. But there are still sites like Monster, Nivu, Eluda, and other places that are not necessarily as mainstream that are still extremely helpful. And it's always good to know about job boards that might be more specific to your field. For example, U of T has a job board for librarians, and that's something that's not super mainstream, nor do they have an email service, but it's something that I was checking when I was searching for a job as a librarian. It is really important to create accounts on Indeed or LinkedIn because that allows people to find you, but also you are getting emails of jobs that are popping up in PEI or wherever you live to apply to. So on the left hand side of the screen, that's an example of a job that I could apply for, records management and PEI, and it's really good to know what's around, and having that information at your fingertips is very helpful. We're going to talk about resume writing because I know there's a lot of tips and tricks out there, and I'm going to try to distill them into things you should and should not do. Resume is a summary of your life to highlight aspects that would be of interest to a prospective employer. This is really important to remember because it's really easy to include non-essential information of all the things you've done in your past, and sometimes you don't always need to do that. So let's talk about what you should do. Here are some things you do want to have in your resume. You want to have simple formatting with a readable text, which means it should be streamlined and have Times New Roman or Arial font, that is 12-point font. You want to include the most relevant information as your work experience. So if you have 2 degrees, but you include high school in your most recent education, that might not be the most relevant education, and same can be said for your work experience. You don't want to include the babysitting job you did when you were 12 if you're applying to a job and you're now 20. So let's keep that in mind when you're thinking about work experience to include. When you're describing your duties of a specific job, you should use action words such as collaboration or implementation. That's a great way of saying you collaborated with your coworkers on a specific project and you implemented a new software or task into your workflow. All of these things are very important when you're considering what hiring managers want to see. Tailoring your resume to a job description is also very important. Job descriptions include a lot of buzzwords that you should include in your cover letter as well as your resume. So when somebody's reading your resume, they are looking at it and saying, oh, this is great. This is a great person for our job because they have the specific qualities we're looking for. Here are some things that you shouldn't do on your resume. Do not include any personal or inappropriate information. It's actually illegal to include your age and your gender, or please do not include your social insurance number. All these things are inappropriate to have in your resume because they shouldn't matter to the hiring manager because they are going to hire you based on your skills. And they make this decision based on looking at your resume for 7 seconds. So you have a very good impression to make in a very short amount of time. So ensure that you're putting your best foot forward, and that does not need to include your age, gender, SIN number, or other personal information that shouldn't sway their decision. When you're writing your duties, as I was talking about before, that you want to include action words, but you don't want to include too many. You want to ensure that you have about 4 or 5, that 6 might be pushing it, but to ensure that you include enough information, but not so much that it takes up too much space. And that goes into the next point. You don't want your resume to be more than 2 pages because you will have your cover letter before your resume, and that in itself will create a 3-page document. So anything more than that is a little bit daunting for somebody, and you want to include, as I said before, the most relevant information. The biggest thing is at the bottom of the list, do not have typos in your resume, because if you are claiming to be detail oriented and you have a typo, then obviously you're not that detail oriented. So ensure that you're following these do's and don'ts of your resume and you'll be off to a great start. How do I format my resume? That's a question that people get very confused about and often have different opinions. Well, you want to ensure that out from the rest. And this means using a little bit of color and making sure that your name stands out as the largest text on the top of your resume. So your name should be at the top. It should be maybe 50 Times New Roman font. And you have your personal information like your name, or excuse me, like your phone number, email, and where you live, and even that's not necessary all the time. Underneath it in smaller text such as 20, for example, and then a colorful bar or underneath it. And even saying that, you could make your name to be a nice color as well, as long as it's consistent and subtle, and it allows the hiring manager to look at your cover letter or resume quickly and say, oh wow, that's a beautiful resume. You want to be consistent when you're creating your resume. You want to ensure that if you have bolded titles for all your job duties, you're doing that throughout the entire resume. And if you're tabbing over to the right-hand side of the screen with all of your dates and locations of the specific job, that you're doing that for everything. Resumes are meant to look very clean and easy to read, and if somebody has resume that's hard to go through, then you're not going to get hired because that's more work for the hiring manager. You always want to ensure that you're using the same type of font as well, and it's much easier if you're using the tab button when you're creating spaces between each of your information components, because if you're using the spacebar, then that causes nitpicky mistakes and could make it look messy if things are not in order. You also want to make sure that your information is in chronological order. That's a huge mistake that some people make, is that they put things in a random order. It doesn't have to be alphabetical order. It doesn't have to be the job you like the best. It needs to be in chronological order and how long you've been in that job. And you should also have the location of which that job was. So I worked in Halifax for a few years. So on my resume I have Council of Nova Scotia Archives, Halifax, Nova Scotia, because that's where that job was. So and you can't always assume that people know where everything is. So please ensure that you're including that information. Some headings to include in your resume include your contact information, your objective, your education, relevant work experience, and volunteer experience. And as a goal, here's an example of a resume. You can see the career objective is in the top. And as I mentioned before, Andrew's example is very large text at the top, and he has his information of where he lives, as well as his email and phone number. And as I said before, if you're not comfortable putting your address, you don't necessarily have to do that. You could just put Stratford PEI in this example. And you can see that he has his education. He put occupational therapy assistant program, and he has May 2021 and he's a candidate for that. And you're allowed to do that as a student. If you're graduating from a program, please include that you're a candidate of 2021, and that's completely fine. And as well as your relevant courses. And if you came out of high school, please include that in your resume as well, because like I said, that is important information for your education experience. After that, Andrew has a list of qualifications. Um, Again, really important to have these outlined so the hiring manager can see and make judgments based on these highlighted skills. And the relevant work experience, he put librarian assistant, academic tutor, dishwasher at Sam's, and please take note of how things are formatted. Like I said, he has Holland College, Charlottetown, Charlottetown Rural High School, Charlottetown, Sam's Restaurant, Charlottetown, and all of the dates and years that he was working at that specific job. Andrew also included his volunteer contributions, which is something that can be included in your resume as well. If you have any awards or other dignifying parts of your life that you want to include, that can also be put at the bottom. A big no-no that people often include is references upon request at the bottom of their resume. Please do not include that. It is not necessary because the hiring people will have instructions of whether or not they want you to bring your resume with references to the interview, or they will ask for 3 references as you're handing in your resume electronically. I've also created a quiz for you guys to complete, which I will send to your instructor that you can complete at any time. If we were in person, I would have done a Kahoot game, which is really fun, but I tried to make this as interactive as possible, so you could do this now and come back to the slides, or you could do this at the end. But please take time to do the quiz, as it is just meant to check your understanding about resumes and cover letters, and it's pretty fun. Now we're going to talk about cover letters and how to write a cover letter. And similarly to resumes, we're going to go through the do's and don'ts of. One big thing that you should do for your cover letter is personalize it for each company. You don't want to use a canned cover letter that you just plug and play or you download off the internet that gives you a sample of the right things to say. In saying that, I will say that I do have a cover letter template that I use, but change up specific things so I'm following the buzzwords that the company is using and change my specific strengths that I want to highlight because, as the next point says, you want to focus on your strengths that are related to the job. And you should add a statement of intent, which is usually about your aspirations to work at that job and ensure them that you would be a good candidate for the job. Another huge thing to do is to actually combine your cover letter and resume into one document. So when you're handing it in via email or on CareerBeacon or Indeed or LinkedIn, it is 3 pages in a PDF. So that's really important to do when you're creating your cover letter so the hiring manager can look at everything at once. And I should also point out, when you're creating your cover letter, you often want to know who the hiring person is, so you can write, "Dear Miss Scully," or "Dear Mr. Andrews," because that makes it look like you've done the correct amount of prep work and you looked into the company, which you should always do whenever you're going in for a job. You should always research the company and understand a little bit about their mission and what they do, which you can also put into your cover letter because you can say something like, "I'm so excited to apply for this position as I believe your company's mission of blah 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 aligns with my own values because blah blah blah." All of that is really great messaging, and you can highlight your own skills of researching the company as well as promoting yourself in that way. Things that you don't want to do, I mentioned it already. Don't use a canned template. Don't go beyond one page, so ensure that your cover letter is only one page, but also ensure that it's not too short. If your cover letter is 2 paragraphs, that's not enough. You want to ensure that you have the necessary information that covers everything, and one page should be enough to do that. And you also are doing a bit of a game in how well you can format your sentences and how well you can uh, be direct in your writing. Do not repeat your resume. That is not the goal of a cover letter. You want to highlight your skills that may not be on your resume, and maybe projects that you've done in school or OJT that you can use as examples that would be beneficial for their company. So don't repeat your resume, highlight your skills, and again, do not have spelling or grammar mistakes because it makes you look bad, and you should always have another set of eyes on your cover letter so people can ensure that you sound very good. So cover letter examples include. Okay, let's talk about portfolios. I want to touch on this because one student mentioned that one of the best things he learned at Holland College was how to create a portfolio. So I wanted to bring this knowledge to you. They are a little bit field specific sometimes because when people think of portfolios, they think of things related to graphic designers or architects or someone who does a lot of drawing or art, but they're particularly important for you because you can keep track of the projects that you did in your OJT, internships, or any project-based courses that you've completed. Portfolios are meant to act as an example of reports, surveys, graphs, press releases, artwork, spreadsheets, or any other specific materials that you design for a large project. So, for example, one of my master's courses was called Management Without Borders, which had a 10-week project where my group, which was a group of people from different management uh, programs at Dalhousie, so we worked with a community company to conduct research on an upcoming project they were doing, and our final report was something that I helped build and create, which was a literature review, research, and many other aspects of this project that I mentioned in my cover letter frequently. And it was very possible for a hiring manager to want to look at that. So I kept all of the literature reviews and posters and things like that we created for this project because it's something that's part of my portfolio that I helped create that had a larger impact once it was completed. And it's a great thing to have if you actually don't have a lot of job experience, but you do have an on-the-job training experience. And it's a good way for you to keep track of the work that you've done because it's quite easy to forget that many projects have little parts to them, and it might seem minute at the time, but very important when you're thinking of it in a bigger picture. And another tip that I received from the academic librarian from Mount St. Vincent is when you keep a portfolio, if you ever want to change jobs in after 5, 6 years of being at a company, if you have a portfolio of all the projects that you completed in that time, you're able to show a new company, like, these are all the massive things that I've done in my previous position, and I have made changes and my company is improved this way through my actions. All of this is really important, especially when you're thinking about higher level jobs. So portfolios are not just for graphic designers or architects. It can be for you to prove the projects that you've done and the experiences that you have. Things to include in your portfolio. So you want to have a career summary and goals, a mission statement, your skills, abilities, and marketable qualities, list of accomplishments, samples of your work, list of recommendations, employer evaluations, licenses and certifications, awards and honors, professional development that you've done, such as conferences and workshops, professional associations you're with, volunteer experience, and reference lists. So something that we should also talk about when you're thinking about a portfolio is how to set it up. So oftentimes there are physical portfolios that you have in a nice binder with plastic sheets where you put all of your information in. One big tip I got when researching portfolios is that you never want to hole punch anything. Everything should be in plastic covers with tabs so the hiring manager can quickly go through it and look at specific things that you are talking about or the projects that you've worked on, and it should be very well organized with these sections. Another thing to do is an online portfolio through websites like Wix, Google Google Websites. Google Websites is something that's an extension from your Google accounts, which is very user-friendly and can include all of these things that are mentioned on this slide. And what I've also seen is that portfolios are basically personal websites that people have created to highlight their skills, and they provide the link on their resume or in their job portfolios on Career Beacon or Indeed or something like that, so hiring managers can look at all of your skills before even getting in touch with you. So these are things that you should consider when you're thinking about a portfolio. Another question that I had when I was researching portfolios is, when do you give a hiring manager a portfolio? So the tips that I received was portfolios should be handed after the interview when you're shaking hands to say thank you. You give it to the hiring manager, say, here's my portfolio if you're interested in looking at it, and then they can look at it after the interview. Or you can send your virtual portfolio to them when you send a thank you note, as I'll talk about later, because anytime you go for an interview, you should always send a follow-up thank you note. Or you can link it in your LinkedIn profile, or when you apply for a job, you can include the link in the resume that you're handing in. So it's either before or after, but you don't usually bring it out during an interview from what I've read online. Okay, so now we know about resumes, cover letters, and a portfolio, and you've got an interview that's very exciting. Now what? Before your interview, like I've mentioned before, always research the company. When you know more about the company, it makes you look good and you can answer specific questions about the company when the interview is almost over, because whenever they ask you if you have any questions, you should always have questions. So if you research the company, you could say, oh, I'm interested in XYZ you do as part of your company. Looks really good on you, and it makes it look like you're very interested in the company. So always research it before you go in. Do mock interviews. That's very important because you need to speak out loud your answers to specific questions, because thinking about them in your head isn't actually going to help you, because you need to get your tongue wrapped around the answers that you're going to say. I know that sounds crazy, but the more you speak out loud, the better rehearsed you are when you get in there and you're not as nervous. And when you do mock interviews, you can get feedback on your responses. Whenever you're talking about group projects, we often have the tendency of saying we when you want to focus on yourself. So you want to say I. So those are little things that I learned from doing mock interviews. And it's always great to have those tips and tricks whenever you're going into an interview so you feel more calm after you get there. And you also want to provide examples that prove your strengths whenever you're doing an interview. And again, when you're practicing that out loud, you can practice what you're going to say, what you did in a project that proves a strength. All right, so the day of the interview, you always want to make sure you're dressing appropriately. And this means that you are wearing neutral tones, and remember that conservative is always better. So even if you're wearing black pants and a neon turtleneck and a black blazer, that may not be the most appropriate thing to wear because it's kind of flashy. It's outstanding. So you want to wear maybe a beige blouse with your black slacks. It's something to be mindful of. When I go in for interviews, I try to stand out in different ways. So I will wear my big glasses that make me stand out from other people, or I'll make sure that I wear pretty dangly earrings that kind of make people notice that, or make sure my hair is really curly. Just something that kind of sets you apart in other ways, but yet fashionable, and not in terms of uh, patterns or colors or inappropriate dress like a short skirt. We don't want to do that. Or a stained shirt for the guys out there. Never wear a stained shirt or a stained tie. All those things make you look sloppy. Another really big thing to remember that I don't have on this slide, do not wear perfume or a cologne. Most job places are scent free, and if you wear a strong scent, you may not even be able to go in for an interview due to a hiring manager having a sensitivity to smell. So ensure that you are fresh but not wearing a very overpowering smell. Always arrive early, because if you arrive right on time or even late, obviously that's very stressful because you have to make sure you're finding the right room. You want to shake everybody's hand. You want to go in and make a good impression and make sure you're smiling and not slumped over. You want to stand tall and shake people's hand and ensure that you're presenting your best self. And that kind of goes into the next point. Have an approachable demeanor. So that means, like I said, you're smiling, you shake hands, and when you sit down at the table when you're interviewing, you don't want to be slumped in your chair with your arms crossed. You want to sit up straight, hands on your lap, smiling, and being very attentive whenever people are talking to you in the interview. So smiling and nodding or leaning forward slightly, having a very approachable demeanor will make a big difference because body language is huge. It's what people view first, right? Whenever you are presenting yourself, you don't speak before they see you, so ensure that you're presenting your best self physically as well. And when you're in the interview, if you cannot hear the interviewers or you're confused about a question or there's a really loud fan beside your head and you can't hear the interviewers, please ask for a change in the logistics of the room because that impedes your performance in an interview. For example, when I was interviewing for my job at Holland College, I was under a vent and I could not hear anything my interviewers were asking me, and I had to ask them if we could move down the table because I couldn't hear what they were asking me, and that was impeding my ability to answer their questions. And for another position that I had, or an interview that I had, it was an online Skype interview, and I had to ask them to unplug something on their end of things because a really loud feedback noise was coming from their computer, and I, again, impeded my ability to answer their questions. So if you're uncomfortable, can't hear, you should say something because you want to do your best in the interview. I mentioned this before, but after the interview, send a thank you note via email, and this is where you can also attach your portfolio if you have one. This is another way for you to stand out from the rest. Not very many people send a thank you note via email after an interview, and that's a great way of saying, this has been a great opportunity for me. It was a pleasure to meet all of you. I really hope to hear from you. Please let me know if you have any more questions. All of that is super professional and it makes you look really good. So ensure that you do that. I have another quiz. It's not really showing up on this slide and you can't do it with the voiceover anyway, but please take time to do the quiz that I've sent out to your instructor and take some time to make sure you understand. Thank you so much. Please get in touch with me if you have any questions or concerns. And if you need extra help during this time of quarantine and self-isolation, please get in touch because I'm more than happy to help you with anything related to your assignments or searching or research or writing help. Anything that you need, please get in touch. Thank you so much.